So now I get to introduce Punch, who we're really happy to have him talking about men's sheds today. Punch Jackson retired in 2009 after a long career of community and public service. In his early career, he worked for the Winnipeg YMCA in camping and outdoor education. He's been a private consultant and spent 30 years with Alberta's public service. He worked on many areas within Alberta public service, including recreation, sport, community development, the voluntary sector, the Wild Rose Foundation, and Alberta's public libraries. His volunteer work has included the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association, Volunteer Alberta, the Leisure Information Network, national chairman, and lately the creation of the Men's Sheds Association of Edmonton and the Alberta Men's Sheds Association. Punch has been actively advocating for men's sheds in Alberta since 2013. He's chairman of the Men's Sheds Association of Edmonton that was created as an umbrella to help promote and support men's sheds in the Edmonton area. He's the editor of Men's Sheds Across the World, sits on the interim board of the Alberta Men's Sheds Association, and is an advisor with the group that formed the Canadian Men's Sheds Association. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Punch. Welcome. We're so excited to have you.
Good morning, and thank you very much. First of all, a big thank you to Sage for everything that they have done for men's sheds in Edmonton, and for giving us this opportunity to tell the story again of men's sheds. So, Tori, if you can get some presentation stuff up here, then we'll get her rolling. Okay, we'll get started. This is the caption slide, and it's a group of guys that are part of a shed downtown in Edmonton. And that particular group of guys has a very well-known florist from Edmonton, an IT specialist, a retired teacher, a carpenter, a salesman, and a gentleman that is on AISH, who is one of Edmonton's premier volunteers. He volunteers for absolutely everything under the sun. Next. So there's always an elephant in the room when we talk about men's sheds, and that's, yeah, what about women? Where do women fit? Well, the men's shed movement in the world would not have gotten started if it hadn't been for women. Women recognize the need for something different for men as they watch their men age, the men in their lives, whether it's their husband, their brother, their father, their uncle, whatever. But women have played an incredible role. They've been planners, they've been motivators, they've been supporters, builders, influencers, and in some cases, there's women who are very active in sheds. And I hate this phrase, and tea and cakes. Most of the time, the women aren't involved with tea and cakes. They're doing things that are very active, either in the background as planners and supporters, or as doing projects in sheds. Next. So this is where it all begins. There's men all over the world, all over Edmonton, that are in these positions right now, at this very minute, sitting in a recliner with a grumpy look on their face, or asleep on the couch with the clicker in their hand. And they have very little motivation to get up and get out. So this is where it all starts. Next. So what's a shed? What is a men's shed? It could be like this picture. It could be very simple. It could be on the edge of the city. It could be an extended garage in your very neighborhood. It could be anything. The shed could be a coffee shop. It can be a group of guys, and you've seen them all over the city. In the mornings, there are men in coffee shops. The difference between the guys that are sitting in those coffee shops and guys in men's sheds is that these guys in the coffee shops, when they're finished their coffee and telling their stories and complaining about the government, they go home. And that's the end of it. Men's shed guys get to the shed and they banter just like the guys in the coffee shop, but then they begin to do other things. It could be working on a community project. It could be fixing something, but they're active. They could be doing craft work. They could be doing something as simple. And I got taken aback when I first heard this. They could be doing something as simple as a jigsaw puzzle. And there were a group of guys in a downtown residence that have a shed, and they had no desire to use power tools. They were in their mid to late 80s. And so that they were doing things like puzzles. And the fellow that ran the puzzle table said to me, Punch, you wouldn't believe the conversations that take place around this puzzle table. Guys bare their souls around this puzzle table. So men's sheds can be as complex as you want them to be, or as very simple as you want them to be. Next. So where did the sheds get started? And these are, there are lots of myths, and I've been listening lately to a lot of podcasts from Australia. And the sheds first started in Australia, in Tongala, and they were going through a rough patch, the same, almost a mirror of Alberta from the point of view of boom and bust. And they were in a bust stage, and it had been a bust stage for quite some time. And so they had a real spike in suicides. The rate of depression was very high. Men were very secluded, not sharing, not talking. So it was very dark mood in Australia. There was a woman who during this time was running a program for older citizens, and it was to try to motivate them, try to lift their spirits, try to get them thinking more positively. And so she was very disappointed because the attendance in these workshops was all women. There were no men. So she was wondering about this, and she was following the group of women out of the building one day, and she noticed that the parking lot was full of cars, and that the women were all being picked up by their husbands. So she started to wonder about this, and so she asked the maintenance man, "What's the deal with this? Why are these guys just hanging out in the parking lot? They don't look like they're too happy." And he said, "Well, that's, just the way it is. They're just not excited about coming in to this kind of a structured situation." She said, "Well, what can you do? Can you help me out at all here?" And he says, "Well, why don't I invite these guys into the back and into the workshop area that we have for the building?" So that's what he did. He invited the guys to come back into the workshop, and the woman was watching, and she noticed that the guys were talking to each other. They were enjoying working on these little projects that the maintenance guy had come up with. And lo and behold, the first shed was born in Australia. And the maintenance man said there were a couple things that were important about that group of guys. One, they were doing things they wanted to do. They weren't being told to feel happy. Second thing was that they were kind of in control of what happened in that shed. And I think that's the essence of and the success for sheds. They're grassroots, they're bottom up, they're controlled by the men in terms of what they actually do on a day-to-day basis and what happens in their shed and what the rules are for their shed. So they have space and they have control of that space. So someone was able to see a therapeutic value in those shed situations, and then men's sheds were born. Next. So from that one shed in Australia, that was in 1998, there are now over 1,200 sheds in Australia. The number there for Ireland is now 500. Scotland has 136 sheds with, as you can see, 50 plus in development. In England, 587 and 141 in development. Wales has 70. Canada has now got just over 50 sheds. The Americans have just over 25, and we even have 4 sheds in Iceland, 33 in Denmark, and 11 in Kenya. And there's now sheds being started in South Africa. Next. So who goes to these sheds? Like I said on the opening slide, they're men from all walks of life. Every segment of society, men that have money, men that don't have money. Professional men, tradesmen, farmers, and the old story, the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. Every type of male is attending sheds. And sheds are open to all men. Next. So why go to sheds? The reason can be that men are just bored. They've got nothing to do. They're not motivated. They've got nothing but time on their hands. And many men, their whole social environment, their whole social life is built around work. And when they retire, that whole network disappears. Yes, there are a few people that they might maintain contact with, but overall, they lose their network. The friendship circle, their workmates are gone. They have no reason to get up in the morning. They're like those guys on the couch in the recliner. They can be very lonely. Some of the men may have lost their lifelong partner. They're feeling cooped up since downsizing. Many of families go through that process of downsizing, where they move from that big house that had a little workshop in it to a condo or an apartment, and there's a loss of the tinkering space. There are men who go to the sheds who want to share their tinkering skills, their wood turning, woodworking, gardening, stained glass. They want to share their hobbies with other men. Next. But the key thing is they're bored and they've got time on their hands. The big plan with the when they retired with the job jar, they found out that the job jar jobs were done awfully quickly. They could be separated, divorced, their partner could have died, and they're lonely. As I said before, they've downsized and they've lost their work area. They could be unemployed and lost their social network. And this one, they're underfoot at home. Those guys that are on that couch and that recliner, they're underfoot and they're causing a bit of grief at home because they're there all the time and there's little freedom for their partners. They could be new to the city and have no existing network. In Alberta, that's something that's happens all the time with our oil and gas industry, agriculture. We've got transient population coming and going, and so they have to have a network, and men's sheds can fill that. Next. So why do men go to the workshops? Well, it provides them with a place where they can feel included, where it's safe. The aim of the sheds is to improve the health and well-being of the guys that go to the sheds, to put them in a positive environment where they can tinker, they can talk. They can do projects like woodworking, bikes, cooking, music, yelling at the TV if there's a TV in the shed where they can watch the playoffs for hockey. And if you're an Edmonton fan, maybe in 2025, the playoffs for football. But there's sheds that specialize in bike repairs. They help sheds or other community projects like Sports Central. The sheds do things for other people as well as the guys in the shed. In this particular case, you can see this is a father and his daughter working on a project together, probably on a Saturday, and something that is very, very popular in sheds across the world. Next. So how do the guys actually benefit from a shed experience? Well, it's primarily with contact with other men. They have a network, they have a place, they have friends, they have banter, they have stories, they can tinker, they can play chess, they can fix things, they can do projects for the community or just chat over coffee. There's a famous video on men's sheds where this gentleman is explaining everything that happens in a men's shed, and he's showing people all these different things that happen. He's even showing them about, they have a guy in the shed who's blind and what he does. And then the interviewer says to this guy at the very end, well, what do you do in the shed? And he says, I don't do anything. All I do is I have coffee and talk to the guys, and it's really exciting for me. Sheds give guys a sense of purpose. And in many of the stories, we've seen where men are on the tinkering on that edge that's very dangerous. They say that the shed has given them a new purpose in life, a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to get out of the house. Next. So they've got a social network. They have camaraderie. They have some purpose. They could be learning new skills or teaching skills. We've seen in many of the sheds, the older guys are teaching the young guys about some of these old tools. The young guys, they've got these fancy power tools. They've got routers. They got things that they're just magic. They never had any idea that the work that those tools did was all done by hand back in the day. And so the old guys are showing them how to use those tools. In exchange, sort of, I'm learning something, I'll teach you something. They usually end up showing the older guys all the tricks of their telephone, their cell phones, what they can do with the cell phone, how they can use it for emailing, all of these little apps. And usually most of the older guys are not using too many apps, but they do need to know about those apps. Gives guys a sense of creativity. They can be creative in the shop. And they're giving back to the community. And there's what's been called health by stealth. And that's where you're not preaching to the guys, but you may be bringing in a speaker that talks about various aspects of men's health. And it's more subtle. There's a use of posters, but guys are getting the aha, that's what's wrong. Oh, all the stuff that's not working too well below the belt. There's conversations about that. What happens is that there's enhanced home conversations. Men didn't have what that weren't going to the shed didn't have a whole lot of stories to tell around the dinner table at night. Their wives would be out and about in the community doing volunteer work or with their women's groups, working at the church, doing whatever. And they'd come home at night they are just full of stories. And the men wouldn't have anything. When they come back from the shed, they have lots of stories to tell. Stories about tools, stories about projects, stories about, oh, did you know what happened to so-and-so? So they're participating much better. And they're not underfoot. And that's a key thing. And I think in these graphics, you can see that there's contrasts. There's guys that are actually master woodworkers, and there's guys who, yeah, I cut a tree down once. There's that kind of range of participation in the shed. Next. So what happens? What actually happens in the shed? Well, the main thing is there's a place for coffee. There's a coffee pot, and there's a place to talk. In many cases, there's a workshop. And I'll talk about that as a challenge later, because workshops take space, and space is something that's a real challenge in urban Canada. There could be puzzle work. There could be artwork. Guys bring their sketching materials that they didn't have space for in their apartment. Now they have a space that they can have for their sketching or their painting. There's working on community projects, personal repair projects. There's always lamps to fix. The cords are frayed. So they replace the cords. They learn how to replace the cords. Someone undoes it. They go on tours. The guys in Edmonton have been tours everywhere. They've adopted the bees. The guys downtown have adopted bees and are doing in their little shops. They build those bee homes. So that's pretty neat. Zoom sessions. During COVID, Zoom sessions were adopted by a lot of places across the world. But the guys downtown in Edmonton, they got on the Zoom session right away. They were encouraged by the SAGE staff that would be a good way to keep the guys together. That group of men stayed together for the entire 2 years. They had over 100 different Zoom sessions, 100 different presentations. Every week they had 1 or 2 presentations. They could be on every aspect of men's health. They could be on coal mining. They could be on all of the different pieces of history around Edmonton. And the guys were really intrigued by that. They were also intrigued by there were 3 women from the University of Alberta who are working on the urban coyote problem. And they were very interested in how these women had tracked the coyote dens all over Edmonton and the kind of work that they were doing, the research that they were doing. They also had Zoom sessions. For a solid month, they did Zoom sessions with a men's shed in Cardiff, Wales. And they had lots of things in common. But one of the things that they talked a lot about was coal mining, because the guys were talking about the coal mine in the Beverly Heights area of Edmonton. So there was lots of things in common. Next. So does anybody else benefit from the shed other than the guys that go? Well, clearly the families and the wives benefit because the behavior patterns of the men change. They're much happier. They're probably healthier. And they have positive attitudes when they come home, and they can talk about the things that happen. They have something that they contribute at the dinner table. And women always tell me this: the guys are not at home. I've got some space. I can do some things on my own. I don't have him underfoot. And they say that in a bit of a joking way, but I think it is, it's like respite for wives when men are at sheds. But another big a group that gets benefits from men's sheds are other community organizations, because the men's sheds do projects for other community groups. This spring, all the sheds got together, and because we don't have a shed that has a big workshop, we used one guy's garage and some of his tools, and they built picnic tables for a group that was building transitional housing for the homeless, and they needed tables for the people to sit around outside of some of these places so they could have a place to talk. So the guys got together and they built tables for those that particular group of people. There was material left over from that project, and someone else said, look, there's a group of women in Northeast Edmonton that have built a community garden, but they didn't have enough money for a lot of extras. So they have no place to sit. There's no benches or things for them to sit on. So the guys built benches for them, for their community garden. They've recently been asked if by the Federation of Community Leagues if they could help refresh some of the event equipment that they have, that they share with the sheds or with the different community leagues around the city. So that's another project. And one that the guys are toying with, because it's a mammoth project, is building these specialized dog houses for rescue groups for the northern dogs. And so there's a request to build 50 of them. And our guys are very excited about doing this. But again, the problem is that they don't have the space to do it. So they're scrambling to find the space. Next. The challenges. It seems odd, but we've been working at this for quite a few years now, and finding men in the urban areas to step up and take on a leadership role to start sheds is a real challenge. It doesn't seem to be a challenge in rural Alberta. Men seem to be much more willing to step up and to take on some responsibility to develop a shed. The second challenge, and probably it's equal to the finding the men to lead, is the space. Rural Alberta, there seems to be an attitude of sharing space, giving up a building that hasn't been used. It's sitting vacant, and the owner is very willing to share that space for a project like men's sheds. Doesn't seem to be happening like that in the urban centers, and it isn't just Edmonton; it's right across the country. The vacant space in the urban centers is very valuable, and even space that's been sitting for years hasn't been. We haven't been able to access it. So that's a challenge, and it's something that, again, SAGE has stepped up and is helping us to try and find some of those opportunities with vacant space. Insurance is always an issue because there's a liability factor, especially if there's a workshop where men can hurt themselves. So insurance is an issue, and finding companies that will cover men, and cover men not only in the workshop, but when they actually go out to visit other workshops or to visit another location, going on a tour. Then there's the issue of finding men to participate. That's another aspect of getting guys off the couch and getting them to a shed. Sustainability of the sheds will always be an issue, so that finding ways to generate money for the shed to, if it has to pay rent of some sort, or if it's tool replacement, all those kinds of things. There's a challenge with funders because there's funders are very nervous about funding projects that are just for men. And it is interesting, and it's an issue for another day, but that has been a real challenge, is that submitting projects to various funders and then them saying, well, I'm sorry, but you don't have women in your shed. And even after explaining about it, they still don't take us on. Sponsors, that's something that we've embarked on, and there are lots of sponsors in other countries. They have tool companies that act as sponsors, paint companies, hardware companies, financial institutions, health services companies, so that's another step in the process for men's sheds in Edmonton as we move forward. Developing succession plans. When you're dealing with old guys, especially when you're dealing with older guys when they're starting to move into their 70s, and me pushing 80, you need to have a plan. You need to have, you need to begin to transition people. And it's not as easy as you think. People become too comfortable with somebody else taking a leadership role. And sometimes you get guys who want to hang on, but it is an interesting process of having a succession plan. Next. Okay, I'm going to go through a number of wrap-up things here that I don't know what my time is here.
You're good. You've got about, sorry, Punch, you've got about 10 minutes. So if you want to.
Okay, I'll carry on for a bit here and then I'll take questions.
Great.
But I think that this particular slide is that women recognize the need. Women really do see, they can see what's happening to the men in their lives. They can see them sliding into depression. They can see them sitting aimlessly in the house. If they don't have a project to do, they don't have something to get up in the morning for, they see it before men. So the key thing is, and it may be that women have to do this. They have to find a shed. They have to, maybe they even have to start a shed. And by starting a shed, it's finding other people to help them with that process and to encourage men to help start the shed. And this is the first time I've used these two phrases, but it's about save a family. Because when men get into depression and they do stupid things, when they get into these with nothing to do, they do stupid things. They get into gambling online. They may drink too much. They may resort to violence, which is something they may have never, ever done. So save a family is vital here. And it's something that men's sheds can really contribute to. And then the bottom line, I guess, is save a life, is that so many men are committing suicide. And we see it in greater numbers in rural Alberta, where, there's going through these boom bust times, going through the farmers going through boom bust times, so that sheds can't save a life. Give guys a reason to get up in the morning. The shed movement in Alberta, and we've done a pretty good job based out of Edmonton. We've had tremendous support from the Living Hope strategy, which is suicide prevention initiative, which gave us some funding to create awareness programs. So we've done our best with social media. We've done Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We've been Today, we're actually, two of the shedders are going to be interviewed by Nancy Carlson on CBC. And I'll tell you, they're petrified that this is the first time that they've done something like this. So it's a new experience for them, and it's part of that transition process. We've got sheds now in Cold Lake, Grand Prairie, Spruce View, Innisfail, Camrose, 3 in Calgary, and we're doing presentations in Vermilion. I'm going to Beaumont this afternoon, Concordia College right after this presentation. So there's an interest. People are starting to get it. They're starting to understand that men's sheds have a place, and that they can be very significant for men, for families, and for communities. So if you've got any questions, I'll take those before they sign me off here.
So it might take a second just because the mics are muted, so people would have to type their questions into the Q&A box. Just a reminder for folks. So we'll have to just wait and see if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. It's such a powerful movement, and I've heard you present a couple of times, Punch, and it's so, what strikes me is that it's so solutions based, right? Like it's about taking, men's sheds are about using community to support the people in that community, and it's a really powerful thing to see in action. It really is. We do have a question. How does a man apply to have a shed?
You can just contact us. And if Lori or Tori can put the last slide up, it has our email address on it. And
There'll be a little delay. There we go.
take the next, there you go. There's our email address. People can contact us through that. We do try to monitor that every day. So if there are groups that are interested, please don't hesitate to email. You can also access us through our Facebook page, and just go on Facebook and just put Men's Sheds Edmonton in the search. There's a new shed kicking off in Glastonbury, and they're hosting a meet and greet session on November the 26th at 10 o'clock in the morning. So if you want to find out about that, just check into the Glastonbury Community League.
That's great. Harriet would like to know if there's a men's shed in Sherwood Park.
No, but we're looking for some men in Sherwood Park to start one, because it's the demographics of Sherwood Park would say that there's a growing number of seniors in that community.
Absolutely. And Giselle says, just wanted to say thank you for presenting. I'm trying hard to convince and try to find a gentleman to help take the lead here with the support of our community league. Having a tiny Filipino lady be the spokesperson might not resonate. I have your contact, and once we have guys ready to launch, I'll make it happen and support behind the scenes.
Giselle is a follower on Twitter.
Oh, good.
She's been getting information from us for quite some time, so I'm anxiously waiting to provide support for her when she's ready to roll.
That's great. Desiree is telling us that the Facebook site has a different email address listed, so maybe you want to clarify. The one on Facebook is menssshedsyag@gmail.com.
Yeah, no, it's going to be the Edmonton one.
It's going to be the Edmonton one. Okay. Great. I think that's it for our questions today. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much, Punch, for joining us.